Washington just dropped their latest employment data, and honestly, the numbers are borderline unbelievable. I'm using that word in its truest form here. January saw 130,000 positions created, while joblessness slid from 4.4% down to 4.3%. This paints a picture of explosive hiring momentum. Yet plenty of doubters exist, and we're diving into their concerns shortly. Let me walk you through this trend line to show where we stand. Those 130,000 new positions, we haven't witnessed figures this robust in considerable time. For perspective, January 2025 actually eliminated 48,000 positions. Throughout all of 2025, we experienced negative growth across 4 separate months, which makes today's announcement genuinely remarkable. Joblessness trends look equally encouraging. November sat at 4.6%, December dropped to 4.4%, now January registers 4.3%. The sectors shedding the most positions, government work declined by 42,000 during January. Breaking that down, 34,000 federal positions vanished, 18,000 disappeared at state agencies. Meanwhile, localities actually gained 10,000, creating that net 42,000 loss. Finance shed 22,000 roles, media and information cut 12,000, logistics and shipping eliminated 11,200. Healthcare dominated hiring in January, bringing in 81,900 workers. Other highlights worth noting: building trades added 33,000 roles, and factories contributed 5,000, which genuinely surprised analysts who anticipated 5,000 manufacturing cuts instead. All right, continuing forward, earnings reportedly expanded 3.7% annually. Compare that against December's consumer price data showing 2.7% price growth. Simple math suggests paychecks are outrunning inflation costs. Personally, I'm skeptical of these calculations. That's my take. Examining monetary expansion, actual price pressure sits closer to 6% currently. So listen, whatever your beliefs, if you're aligned with me that real inflation exceeds 2.7%, let's use 6% instead, which means what you're seeing here, this moment, earning increases at 3.7%. That simply confirms worker compensation isn't matching price increases, which remains the unfortunate reality in my view. Share your perspective below. But understand, the official story being sold is robust employment growth, massive hiring activity, joblessness collapsing from 4.6% to 4.3%, plus supposedly solid earning gains beating inflation pressures. Yet, as mentioned earlier, skepticism abounds. If you're questioning these figures, you've got company. Americans broadly report feeling economic weakness. They're not sensing robust hiring conditions currently. So where's the gap? I'll explain the gap. They're potentially manipulating these statistics. I'm not inventing conspiracy theories here. Check this out. Alongside January's figures, officials released updated corrections to previous releases. For 2025, authorities initially claimed 584,000 positions were generated throughout 2025. They've now slashed that downward to just 181,000 positions for 2025. That correction reduces 2025's hiring by 69%. So how do you miscalculate by 69%? Given this information, what additional proof do skeptics require? This explains my distrust of official employment releases. They claim 130,000 January additions. Right, absolutely sure. Frankly, that feels fabricated to me. Anyway, following these strong figures, President Trump celebrated publicly. He expressed satisfaction with the outcome. Here's his True Social post, published immediately once official statistics went live. He stated, "Fantastic employment figures, far exceeding forecasts. America deserves significantly reduced borrowing costs on our debt instruments. We've reclaimed our position as the world's dominant economy and deserve the planet's lowest borrowing costs accordingly. This represents interest savings exceeding $1 trillion annually. America's renaissance has arrived." But consider this. If employment truly looks this strong, if hiring momentum is genuinely this powerful, the Federal Reserve becomes less inclined toward rate reductions. The Fed was reducing rates specifically to support employment conditions. But if hiring is thriving, then further rate cuts become unnecessary. Anticipate Trump expressing frustration about rates, specifically about the Fed maintaining current policy until his appointee, Kevin Warsh, assumes control mid-May as incoming Fed leader. My prediction, Warsh will execute Trump's preferred strategy. Otherwise, think about it rationally, strategically. Why would Trump have selected him if he won't reduce rates? Prior to today's impressive employment release, here were the probabilities that the Federal Reserve would hold steady at their upcoming March 18th session. A 77.3% probability they'd maintain current rates at that gathering versus 22.7% odds favoring a reduction. Following today's employment announcement, those probabilities shifted substantially. Currently, there's 94.1% likelihood the Federal Reserve maintains rates at the next session, with just 5.9% probability they'll reduce. Once more, rate cut odds collapsed from 22.7% down to 5.9%. Because why would they cut rates when conditions appear this exceptional? So here's the mechanism. The Federal Reserve reduces rates to stabilize troubled conditions. But if everything's performing this well, then nothing requires stabilization currently. And for entertainment, let me share the probabilities for the following session scheduled April 29th. This will actually mark Jerome Powell's final FOMC as Fed leader. Currently, there's 78.5% probability the Federal Reserve maintains rates at that April gathering. So Powell has 2 remaining Fed sessions as chair, and based on market projections, he's finished reducing rates, all per the CME Fed Watch instrument. However, although he likely won't reduce rates further, the Federal Reserve currently continues expanding the money supply. Now let me address this section of Trump's statement where he argues we must reduce rates to decrease the government's interest obligations. The federal government operates on fiscal years beginning October. This fiscal year so far, federal authorities have allocated $346 billion toward interest payments. Why? Because funds the federal government borrows through Treasury securities require interest payments on those obligations. They borrow capital without receiving preferential terms. They must compensate those lending them money. So this fiscal year already, federal authorities have allocated more toward interest than toward military defense spending. Examine the data yourself. So authorities will allocate approximately $1 trillion on interest this year. Why such enormous amounts? Why are they paying such staggering interest costs? Because federal debt has reached $38.6 trillion and continues climbing rapidly. So if the Federal Reserve reduces rates, then interest costs on this debt would decline. However, reducing rates will trigger inflationary pressure. Let me address this claim. So Trump asserts we've achieved balanced budgets. My answer? Absolutely not. This is demonstrably incorrect. Visit the government's own portal. This is directly the Treasury Department's site. It demonstrates that for fiscal 2026, authorities have exceeded budgets. They're already running deficits of $697 billion with 8 months remaining in fiscal 2026. This isn't balanced budgeting. And per the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, projections indicate federal authorities will overspend and reach deficits of $1.85 trillion for fiscal 2026. Again, this isn't balanced budgeting. Apologies, it simply isn't. This means $1.8 trillion additional that federal authorities must borrow and pay interest against. So that covers the employment report, the latest corrections, plus market responses regarding the Federal Reserve and Trump's commentary. Share your thoughts below. If you found value here, smash that like button for wins of thought. Appreciate your engagement and have an excellent day ahead. Peace.